So we're going to look at the purpose of outdoor learning and what high quality learning looks like. So the first thing I want to think about really is what informs your pedagogical approach to outdoor learning. So in 2009, the DfE defined pedagogy as the understanding of how children learn and develop and the practice through which we can enhance that process. So basically how we help children to learn and how we teach them, teaching being in its broadest sense of our interaction, our scaffolding, our engagement with children as part of that, not teaching it in that top-down model that we might have thought about in the past. And it's deeply rooted in our values and beliefs about what we want for children. And when I started my teaching career, because I was a teacher, I was a nursery teacher, one of the very first settings that I worked in was a very large purpose-built nursery. And it was part of a primary school, but back then, and it was in the mid-90s, reception children started school on a staggered start. So in the autumn term, in the nursery, you'd have 2/3 of what would now be a reception cohort, and in the spring term you'd have 1/3, and then in the summer term you'd have a lot of younger children they came in as rising threes, so they were 2 and about to turn 3 came in. And it was purpose built. It was in inner London. It was surrounded by tower blocks, and most not tall tower blocks, mid tower blocks, and most of our children came from those tower blocks. And it was 2 classrooms. They were very unusually hexagons. They had a large shared area in the middle, which was where all of the sort of coats were. There was space for children to leave their coats, leave their bags, leave their shoes as part of that. There was an absolutely massive outdoor, well, it wasn't a shed really, because it was built, it was a substantial structure, and it had been completely built so that children could go in and choose their own resources for outdoors and take them to the outdoor play. It had a covered area that sort of wrapped around. It had a hard surface at the bottom, and then it had a little bit of a grassy hill that went up. And at the top of that, there were wooden built gazebos, I suppose is what you'd call them. And the pedagogy of that setting at that time was that what was indoors was absolutely replicated outside, and then outside as well there were additional resources, so the things that you couldn't do inside. So loose role play, we did actually have sand and water inside, but it was bigger as well outside. There were more opportunities for climbing. There was area for ball play. There was lots of different things outside, but exactly the same doll's house was in each of the indoor classrooms, and it was outside. And with the exception of 10 minutes at the beginning of the day, 15 minutes before and after lunch, and 15 minutes at the end of the day when we had small group story time, our children could choose whether they were indoors or outdoors. So it was a constant free flow for probably close on 5.5, 6 hours for the children a day as part of that. And when the EYFS came in, one of the things that came in as part of that was the expectation that all settings would have some access to outdoors, and we'll expand on that a little bit as we go through. And I always used to think, when you thought about the model of that nursery in London, absolutely possible. But by that point, I was an early years advisor working up in North Yorkshire, and the settings that I went to, some of the very first settings to try to look at how we could get access to outdoor play, listed Victorian primary schools where the only outside area was the playground used by the rest of the school, and where we absolutely couldn't put a door into an outside building to get out. A really successful day nursery that was actually above a supermarket, and it had narrow steps to get down, and actually it was quite a long walk to the nearest open available public space. A preschool setting up in a village hall in the Dales, where just trying to persuade the village hall committee to release even the tiniest part of the car park to allow some outdoor space for that setting took a long time as part of that. So one of the things that I always think about when we think about what informs our pedagogical approach to outdoor learning is first of all, thinking about, so what do we want? Do we want that model where we replicate that indoor play completely, and children also have access to outdoors? That was very much the model some years ago, much less common now. Do we want to extend indoor play? So there might be options of the indoor play that go to the outdoors, or do we have a discrete and different approach to outdoors? And you may have thought about this about your setting and about your approach. But what I think about in terms of that is we have to think about how outdoor learning can enhance and deepen learning within the curriculum. And right back to the 1800s in Froebel introduced the concept that outdoor space and outdoor learning and connecting with nature was really important to children's learning. So what I like to think about, because we don't all, in reality, an awful lot of settings do not have the kind of provision that I described at the beginning. So there is some compromise around their space, around their adults. And going back to that, at the time, we had a 1:10 ratio for adults. We also had an additional adult who did who was a care assistant and particularly did toilet training with the children, and we almost always had students. So in reality, we had 50 children, and we probably very rarely had less than 10 adults. So we had the space and we had the adults and we had the time. But in reality, in lots of settings, we're limited in one of those things. And I sometimes think that when we're thinking about outdoor learning, we need to think realistically about what's our pedagogy and what's our approach. What are our barriers and how can we look at how we overcome them? So thinking about how indoor learning indoors can be consolidated, progressed, or enhanced, what experiences are best suited to a combination of outdoor learning, and what is it that we can only do outdoors. So thinking for a little bit, and you might want to scribble something down, or if you're with somebody, think about what is it that informs your pedagogy for outdoor learning, and what it's actually possible to do within your setting. So whilst you're thinking about that, I would just share some of the things that I find when I go out. And when I go out and visit lots of schools and lots of settings still. And it's outdoor play is the biggest area of discussion. Outdoor learning is the biggest area of discussion. And it's the area in which practitioners say they generally find it hardest. And there are lots of reasons for that. One of them is often available space. So it's the size of the space, the shape of the space, the nature of the flooring in that space, whether it's adjacent to the room in which the children are. So is a free flow aspect available or is it not? Whether that space is also used by other children at different times of the day. The amount of time, so the organisation of time. It used to be said that when we're looking at planning, whether it's in areas of continuous provision or whether it's an outdoor, that there was a sort of it was often used 60 minutes. So looking for 60-minute times to allow children to really engage in that learning. Now, I would say that when I'm generally working with schools and settings, we start with trying to find quality slots of 40 minutes as a minimum. If we can't get that free flow, and there's lots of reasons why we can't think about, have we got time to put in 40-minute high quality slots as a minimum, a couple of times a day, depends on morning, afternoon, probably depends on your children when they come and go as well, and the children's entitlement across a week. And I certainly work with some settings who, because of the nature of what they do, have more outdoor learning on some days than others because of the space requirements on shared spaces. About thinking about adults, and we know that that there are ratios, obviously, in terms of adult to children in terms of that. One of the things that I always tell people, so I'd come from this amazing pedagogical background, and the very last class that I taught, reception class I taught, I went on to teach Key Stage 1 after that, but the very last reception class I taught, I had 34 children in a classroom, and it did have access to an outdoor area, but I didn't have any support at all except on Wednesday mornings, and that was when we did PE. And so it wasn't the best time we had a hall slot, sorry, to do PE if we wanted to. So it wasn't the best use. So actually, I'd come from this background. I'd worked in lots of nurseries and receptions. I'd had this, and suddenly I was in this space where actually I couldn't do what I wanted with 34 children on my own. So I had to shape and change what I did as part of that. And I had to be reflective and thinking about what was possible. So keeping hold of my principles, but thinking about what was realistically going to be possible. And you might be informed by research Oh, and you might be informed. You're obviously going to be informed by the statutory requirements. There's the educational programs that you need to take into consideration, but there's also the requirements about outdoor play. And I'm going to actually tell you what it says, because there's often a lot of confusion. So it says providers must provide access to an outdoor play area, or if not, that is not possible, ensure that outdoor activities are planned daily, unless circumstances make it inappropriate, for example, unsafe weather conditions. So there's often a lot of myth that we have to have free flow play. We don't. We have to have access to an outdoor play area. And there are some settings who don't have access to an outdoor play area. There are certainly some nursery provisions in London, which have been many times judged as outstanding by Ofsted, who actually use public spaces and parks for their outside play area. But they're very purposeful, and they've planned for the time that the children are going to spend outside as part of that. So this is the University of Cambridge Primary School outdoor play area, part of their outdoor play area. So they were opened, I've been involved with them for about 10 years. I think they opened in 2015. The school was designed by educational experts. You can go and have a look on their website. It's round. And the first time that I went to this school, it was just a hole in the ground. And they have a playful inquiry approach all the way across the school. So every class from nursery up to year 6 has access to outdoor learning. And this is part of their EYFS outdoor learning. So they have a nursery, and then they have 3 reception classes. They all have direct access onto what is a very very large space. What you can see is probably less than a third of it. We're going to look at a couple of other pictures of it in a minute. And this is their outdoor sand. You can see that it is absolutely enormous. That is a full-size tree trunk in the middle, so for you to get the space of the size. So this was, it had all been planned in line with their pedagogy and about how playful inquiry or playful learning is promoted in part of that. So this is the environment that the children had in terms of their sand. And you can't quite see, but in the back of this bit, this is another little bit of it, there's a mud kitchen in the back. So actually they had a really big mud kitchen space as well. So this was what the children were used to. And it's a school that's very much built on pedagogy. And then we went into the pandemic, and the children came back into school, but they were in bubbles. And the way that it worked, the outdoor play space had to be split so that the 4 classes didn't mix in terms of that at this moment in time. And these are some pictures of the provision through there. And why I've put it in is because I think it's so important that they maintained their pedagogy about how children learn to play. So for one of the classes ended up with the amazing sand space that you can see, and one of them ended up with the amazing mud kitchen that you can see. But for the other 3, they didn't compromise on their pedagogy. They created individual sand areas where they could for each of the classes, and they created individual mud kitchens. And I think that one of the things that they learned as part of that was that resourcing doesn't have to look amazing. It's the quality of learning. And certainly these mud kitchens, as you can see, they're on cable storage, they're on tables as part of that. But it's how the children learn and how adults interact with them in that space, which ensures that it's high quality learning as part of that. So I'm going to tell you very briefly about another school that I've worked with as well, to sort of set it into context. So this is a village primary, and they'd always had free flow provision between indoors and outdoors. So they have a typical classroom. It's a Victorian school, I would say. Then they had a sort of indoor-outdoor area, it was a more than a covered area because it had walls in it, but it definitely had a feel of being outside because of the surfacing in it as part of that. And that tended to be a little bit of mixture of some of indoors and some of outdoors. And then they had an outdoor area. It was a reasonable size for a number of children. They only have 20 children. Because they're less than a single form-entry school, and it was fine, and that had large-scale sand, water, climbing, things that you'd expect as part of that, a theatre area, role play, those kind of things, some growing things as part of that. And they'd always had free flow, and they generally only had 2 adults. There's time they have 3 adults, but that's quite rare as part of that. And for many years, the school had very successfully had free flow. And I spoke to the teacher a while ago, and she said that they were really, really struggling with free flow because of the cohort that had come in. She didn't know whether it was post-pandemic. She didn't know whether it was definitely a boy heavy cohort. Because of that, she didn't know whether there was definitely some undiagnosed need within that cohort as well. Definitely some social emotional self-regulation need within that cohort. But for the first time, they were struggling. So we sat down and said, well, what's the challenge? And she said, well, whoever's outside feels that all they're doing is walking around and policing. They're not getting to engage with the children because they're doing so much conflict resolution and managing behaviours. And she said, we've also had to take away some of the things. She said, we've had to take away bikes. We've had to remove some of the different resources that are out there for children. She said, we really feel that our outdoor learning isn't working. And actually our indoor learning isn't as effective as it could have been before. So we looked for how could we solve the problem of that. So one of the things that we did was we looked at the indoor-outdoor area, and we stopped it being an indoor-out area and made it an outdoor area, but it became part of the classroom. So we took away a lot of the things that were in there, and we concentrated on things that can only be done outside or in a big space. So it was covered, but in a big space. So there was some big loose role play, there was some big sand, and there was some big water, and there was some big construction that went in there. So things that they had before, they had some books, they had some scientific exploration, they went into the classrooms. And then they started thinking about the indoor-outdoor space being part of the classroom and the outdoor space being something separate. And instead of going for the free flow, they went to a different approach where actually all of the adults are either indoors with the children using the classroom or the indoor-outdoor space, or they're outside. And in that, so actually, when they go outside, the whole class goes outside at the same time, and there are 2 adults out there. And that enabled them to spend the time modeling expectations. It enabled there to be one adult to manage those conflicts if they needed, and another adult to be able to engage with learning. And what I would say is that this school was really strong on its pedagogy before, but you have to think about the restraints maybe of your cohort or the restraints of your space when you're thinking about that. And when I spoke to them a few weeks later, they said that actually it was working so much better. And for them, it worked. So they'd planned to have 40-minute blocks, morning and afternoon, where everybody was going to be out. And later on in the year, they may change that. They may get to a point where they can go back to that free flow. But I think it's about being adaptive and making the best of the challenges and the resources that you've got at any moment in time. So a little bit of a thinking, and if you're sitting with someone else, you might want to talk to them about it. You might want to jot them down. Well, just take a minute to think about what are your non-negotiables? What are the things that you absolutely must have outdoors for children? So you might be thinking about what's only possible outdoors, what will have more of an impact on learning if it's done outdoors, what might be about consolidating indoor learning, and what might be uniquely about outdoors. I'll give you a very short time to have a little bit more of a think about it. The picture that I've put up is a Victorian school that has an amazing nursery, purpose-built nursery and outdoor, and their reception has to use the playground. There's absolutely no other space. So this is the whole school playground. It's where all of the children come in through it. And the reason that I chose this provision, they have a shed where children access. Everything has to be got out and put away, not only at the beginning and end of the day, but at different points throughout the day as part of that. And I put this picture there because one of my non-negotiables is very much about space for mark making and a surface that you can write on. And you can write on soft pour, but you can write on tarmac so much better. So that's one of my non-negotiables. And I've had a thought about mine. Opportunities for heights and climbing. That might be through the children creating things through construction and loose park play. So big resources that we can't have inside. I would have mark making for me, opportunities for mark making. And we're going to look at some pictures of some different settings. And we know that because of how children learn to write, that it's actually easier for younger children and those whose gross and fine motor skills aren't as developed to actually write against a surface that's flat, so up against a wall or on a trestle or on a board, than it is to write that way and on a piece of paper, because of the different the different physical development that's needed. To have sand and to have water, to have big sand if you can, to have sand where children can take their shoes and socks off and have that experience of sand, to have water, and ideally if you can to have free flowing water as well, to have a mud kitchen or something similar like that. To really think about resources for physical play that you can't have inside. So that might be balls and bats and bean bags as part of that. To think about how we can build nature in, plants and beasts. I always try and have ride on toys and bikes. And as we go through, we're going to have a look at some of that as we go through. And also to think about how we can create social areas. So areas where children can spend time talking, or where children can be collaborative, or where children can talk to adults as well as part of that. So they're my non-negotiables. You might have come up with something different for yourself. So when I'm thinking about planning for outdoor play, for me, the first part is about thinking about what do we want children to learn, not what we want them to do. And sometimes it's the same with indoor and outdoor. We get very focused on activities rather than thinking about the learning. And we know that when we think about the learning, different children might do it in different ways. So going back to the little boy, Reese, in that very first nursery, who never came inside, he did all of his learning outside. So when we were doing learning about number sequencing, for example, he would be doing it by kicking a football against a wall that had numbers, or by throwing bean bags, or by sitting at the top. We had quite a big climbing frame. He used to sit at the top of the climbing frame and he'd have the numbered bean bags and he'd throw them down at you in order and you had to catch them. He was a really physical child. He lived in a tower block. And you know, so and it was the same learning. You know, he could do the sequencing outdoors as part of that. Some other children might have done that indoors with different resources as part of that. So thinking about what we want children to learn, not just what we want them to do, is really important for me. To not be primarily driven by one-off activities. We absolutely can have adult-led activities, possibly with an end point. We can have an invitation to learn. We can have focused learning outside. We absolutely can, but not every single activity that's just one-off. We want there to be opportunities for children to revisit, to practice, to consolidate, and to extend their learning. I shared this before on one of the other courses that I delivered, and that's available to access as a video if you want to have a look at it. But when we think about learning, what the research shows is that across a child's day or a week, they will have a range of this. And when we move, when we're considering older children and we're thinking about older children, what it says in the EYFS statutory framework is, as children go older and move into reception year, there'll be a greater focus on teaching essential skills and knowledge in the specific areas of learning. So it might move a little bit more towards the focused learning at that point, and it might move to some of the structured, although focused learning can really still be very playful in terms of that. And so children need some play that's unstructured without adult support, but the bulk of their day should sit around thinking about, and you might call it something different, but child-initiated play, where adult support within an enabling environment, and focused learning, so adult-guided, playful, experiential activities. And when we want children to have open-ended learning outside, it's never quite unstructured because we've selected the resources that are going to be there to begin with. So actually we're already starting to influence the play just by the resources that we put there. But actually, if children have too much unstructured play, there's a risk that that learning can become really low level and repetitive. And where I see that most frequently is probably about boys and bikes, boys and wheeled vehicles outside, where you will see the boys who go to the same bikes and the same activities every single time. And when someone like me comes to visit, I'll say, oh, do they do that all the time? Is that just a day, or is that what they do all the time in terms of that? Because actually, we want to be able to take that learning forward, and we want them to be able to engage in different activities. So we're going to look at a sort of school that has a curriculum for learning about bikes as we go through, which is quite interesting as part of that. So actually, we want adult support in an enabling environment and that sensitive interaction. And the importance, I can't stress enough the importance in all of this about skilled adults. So think about, how do children learn? So you'll be very familiar with this, but they learn by playing, by being active, by exploring new things and experiences, by talking to themselves, and also by hearing adults talk and model through, by representing ideas, by meeting physical and mental challenges. And we know for some young children, physical challenges are really, really important. By being shown how to do things by adults. So adults modeling how to do things, how to use things, what to do. And by practicing, repeating and applying those skills. So having constant opportunities to revisit that learning and to develop those skills and just to take it that little bit further. And also by having fun and really enjoying their learning. So what's the implication for that in terms of our pedagogy? So we have to think about how we can provide spacious and, I've put, if possible, an appropriate, well-planned provision or regular access to outdoor spaces. About thinking about providing long periods of uninterrupted time for children to play. To make sure that all adults really understand their roles and responsibilities in the outdoor play. I was at a school earlier this week doing head teacher recruitment, and because of the they had a cover arriving into early years just as I came in, and the EYFS leader was greeting the cover person, and she was saying to them, well, your job today is to talk to children and interact to children and interact with children. So she said there will be some focus points during the day, but when you're not doing that, your job is to talk to children and interact with children, to observe children and provide support for those who need the greater challenge or might need specific support, to accept and manage risk. Children need to be able to take risks. If we're wanting confident children, if we're wanting self-regulation, if we're wanting children who can manage their own time, we need who can fail. We need to fail in order to become successful and resilient as adults. So we need to have thought about risk. We can't remove all risk, but it's about removing hazards and thinking about risks and encouraging children to assess and think about those risks for themselves. And we're going to look at some videos that have some things that will potentially be risky within it. To really make sure that parents understand the value of outdoor learning. That's really important. One of the things that I do when I'm delivering courses like this face-to-face is I have a look online. We have a look at some of the very commercial outdoor spaces that you can get, but I haven't included them today for, but sometimes for parents, it's about how it looks. I've been into some outdoor learning spaces where I've just raised my eyebrows and taken a deep breath, because they have clearly not been planned with any thought about how children are going to learn in that space. The focus has been on, you know, the kind, soft paw covering absolutely every inch, built-in numbers and letters in the floor, but with no thought as to why or where. Maybe putting a bike or a cycle track in one particular place, which means learning always happens there, and it's not necessarily always in the right place. Primary colours. You know, I've been to and it can be really, really expensive to do that. And when you talk to settings about, well, why did you do that? They'll say, oh, it's because what parents expect and what parents want. So I think it's about making parents understand the value of the learning that takes place and the environments that support that. About making sure you have the commitment of staff and of senior leaders. And I'm going to talk you through a story about the 2 stories about that in a minute. And about being enthusiastic and sharing your enthusiasm with children. I have I'm advisor to, it's a single form entry primary school, and it's just been judged as outstanding, including outstanding for early years. And it has a purpose-built nursery with a great outdoor space. Its reception classroom, there is no space. It's another London school. Their reception classroom has a tiny, I mean, smaller than a bedroom size, covered outdoor space outside. And then on the edge of that, there's a sort of tiny little bit of raised astroturf, and that we're talking 3 foot wide, and that's it. And then they do have access at different times of the day onto the whole school playground. But you can imagine that whole school playground is used for morning and afternoon play, for lunches, and it's also used for sporting activities, particularly in the afternoon. And so one of the things that they did as part of that is they wanted to have a pedagogy, because at the time they had a different pedagogical approach in reception and nursery, definitely, particularly to outdoors. So they spent a lot of time looking at their progressive curriculum, talking about their skills, linking it back to child development, but talking about how do we want our children to become independent learners. The advantage was that the doors can be opened from the reception classroom really easily onto this space. And the example, and another thing is that it has really good sight from the reception classroom. So, it is immediately next to it. So they cleared away everything that was there, because it was a bit of a mishmash again, like the other one. It had, bits of books and bits of this. The only thing they invested in was, and it's an expensive thing to invest in, they invested in those new connecting community playthings blocks that have sort of nodules on them that allow you to connect them together. They put sand and water out there, although that sand and water does sometimes move in. And they focused their pedagogy on aspects of using outdoor, and they had some loose park play out there as well, aspects of doing that, of using the things that, so they focused that sheltered area on the things that are harder to do inside, though sometimes they do have sand and water inside. And they also focused on lots of portable provision, so lots of things that could be carried inside and outside, and lots of things that could be carried from that outside area by the children to use the whole school playground. And so because of that, they do have free flow at different points during their session, but they also have sessions where they go and use that whole school playground to do that bigger thing. And then when we talk about leadership, I can't actually remember whether it was that school, or I was working with a few of them at the same time, or one of the others, but had a similar dilemma. They have to use the whole school playground. And this is where it comes down to leadership. So the head teacher making sure that at different times that playground was ring fenced just for reception to use, but it went beyond that. So part of their session, they have a 40-minute session minimum in each morning. And part of that session, the second 20 minutes of that session, is when the rest of the school are in assembly. And what they do at that point is they release all of the Key Stage 1 teaching assistants. So they go down to support in reception as well, which means that if they want to have that focused adult-led, adult-directed activities, and they don't do it every day, they can do that in small groups in that big space during that time. And those teaching assistants know those children. They get to know those children really well as part of that. But that's a leadership decision about saying, look, we know it's not great, but we're making the absolute best of what we can as part of that. We've invested in some resourcing, we've invested time, and we've made sure that there's a ring-fenced space as part of that. And the next school one is also a school that we're going to go and have a look at and a think about as we go through. But Tina Bruce, you might have heard of her. She did a lot of research on play in the 90s. And she said frequent lack of attention to the external environment must come from bizarre assumption that knowledge acquired indoors is superior to that gained outside. So one of the things that I always say is that ownership of the environment really, really matters. This is the University of Cambridge Primary School as well. So they're the ones that had that fantastic sand. And this was not purpose-built. It wasn't put in when the school was built. But they noticed that a lot of the children were transporting the sand. They were transporters. They were taking it all over. The sand has to be filled up a lot. But they were transporting it. So they looked at how they could put in transporting in a different way. And they had, I can't remember how many tons of pebbles this was that were delivered. And the children get some of the experiences that they get in the sand, the digging and the transporting. But one of the things that's really interesting is when you filled, there's some green buckets there, when you filled a green bucket with pebbles, you can't lift it on your own. So you need cooperation and collaboration to do it. And that was originally put in to meet the needs of a very individual group of children, but they've carried on as part of that. So this one is another school that I worked with, and there's a long story about this school, and I will condense it down really briefly. So this school had a new build, basically, about 10 years ago, and another inner London school. You can see the housing the children come from opposite low-rise flats. This strip, this outdoor space, is very long and thin. There's two reception classes and a nursery. The nursery takes just 3-year-olds. And then they go, and so 3-year-olds up until reception age as part of that. So they have some young children. They also have quite a lot of children on autism pathways because they have some specialists around that, specialist skills around that. This is, if their outdoor play space is probably about 12 foot wide, and then they have probably another 4 feet of tarmac, which has a really long veranda. So it's long, it's thin. The great bit is that it has a long covered veranda. And when it was put in, someone laid AstroTurf. And I haven't got pictures of it, but there was 2 little hills on it and some AstroTurf. I don't think that any of the practitioners who worked in it had been involved, and they didn't have any ownership. And then what had happened over time was they'd become, I don't know whether it was the pandemic or whether it was different school leaders, but they'd got this. But what basically happened, this is what it looks like now, but it didn't look like this at the time. So there was basically just the strip of AstroTurf, and barriers had been put in. So if you can see the sort of thing with a sand tray, a tough tray at the back, they were loads of those, and they were dotted all over, which meant there wasn't enough space to run or move. So they were sort of there as hazards to stop children moving. There wasn't space for any physical, and all of the part that was undercover was all replicating what was inside. So there was a table where you could go out and do phonics activities, for example. There was a table where you could go and do maths. There was a table, there was a book corner, though the books were really neglected. And so there was a change of leadership at the school, and there was an interim leader, and there'd been a plan to develop the outdoor play. So everybody agreed the outdoor play didn't work. So what they'd done, I understand, is they'd approached loads of commercial companies who'd come and started with the space. They hadn't started with the pedagogy of the school, and they hadn't started with how they wanted children to learn, and they hadn't started with the needs of the children. They'd started with saying, oh, this is a really long, awkward space, isn't it? And they'd come up with designs. And I have to say, and the designs were costing between £50,000 and £100,000. And it had been agreed, the money had been released, that this was going to happen. And then a remarkable thing happened. The drains were blocked, and so it couldn't go ahead. And then there was some change in leadership, a period of interim leadership. And they have an amazing EYFS outdoor leader, and she had quite a lot of changing team at that point. But she said, actually, it's a good thing that's not been able to happen, because we need to spend time looking at the pedagogy of how our children learn and how we want them to learn. We need to look at the interaction between indoors and outdoors, and we need to make sure that we've got practitioners who can use the space, but we also need to make sure that we've got ownership of the space. So when we knew that it wasn't going to happen, there was a lot of debate about, oh, well, it might happen in 6 months, it might happen. And so one afternoon, she and I, with a parent volunteer, just gutted everything. And because it wasn't, nobody had ownership over the area, so because it was 3 different teachers and 6 different support staff, we threw away everything that was broken and damaged, and there was a lot of stuff that was broken and damaged. There were a lot of resources that had been donated by parents with a really good intention, but they didn't fit in with learning or add to it. And there was very much this formal learning approach outside, and there really wasn't any space. And so what they've done, and it has been a year-long journey, is where you can see the second strip of AstroTurf now. That wasn't used at all. That just sort of, it runs all the way along. It goes slightly narrower towards the other end. But when you've only got 12 foot to begin with, managing to reclaim that 3 foot there made a real difference. And what they now have is, it's still a long, thin strip covered in AstroTurf, but they've managed to get ownership of it, because they've really, really focused in on, how do we want our children to learn? And this is the very first thing that we did. So what we did on that very first afternoon is we ordered a fish pond, pond liner, and a lot of sand. And at the time in nursery, and there still are, there were a lot of children who really needed sensory experiences. They were pulling off their shoes and socks, and you know, there was no sand for them to go in. And the school had ordered a massive sand pit, and it just hadn't arrived. It was out of stock, and it was, well, we're waiting for it. So It's there. They cover it up at night with another ground sheet as part of that. It needs its sand constantly filling up because you can see it migrates. The AstroTurf is no longer perfect, and you'll see that in the pictures because it's not about it being perfect. It's about how children use it. The children, it is just outside the nursery door here, but all the children use it. But the children get their shoes and socks off if they want. If they don't, they sit in the sand. Actually, some of the things that were donated work really well. There's a little Tykes kitchen, and it's really well used by the children in terms of this space. But you can see how the tyres weren't there to begin with. We actually edged it with community playthings blocks to begin with. But actually, it's one of the most used areas in it, and it cost a minimal amount of money. And what made a difference was adults who are committed to children learning in that way. And as a result, children are really engaged in that learning. And it's very open-ended. The youngest children can go and choose their own resources if they want as part of that as well. And adults who spend time in there with children. And when children rip their shoes and socks off now, it's not, oh, you better put them back in. It's not, it's not you better put them back in. It's, oh yes, that's great. Let's go and let's go and jump in that sand together. And this was a setting that before didn't allow sand, didn't allow water, didn't allow wood chip. All of those things were not allowed within it, and so completely shifted the pedagogy as part of this. And they would say it's not rocket science. They've really focused in. This is the outdoor strip. So this is the strip that would have been formal tables before. They're not saying it's perfect, but the learning is fantastic in this setting at the moment. One of the things that we found in one of the outdoor storage cupboards, completely unused, was a massive early excellence water set, an extremely expensive resource. That was one of the things we put out on the first day. And by the morning of the second day, the teacher and all the support staff member who was out there and all the children were totally soaked because there was no sort of cover-ups because no one had got any of those because they didn't play with water as part of that. But that's been a great resource. You can see the taps there. The children transport and move the water. They can take it to other places. They can get the AstroTurf soaked if they want as part of that as well. But really, really open-ended learning and adults who know the language and engage with the children as part of that. Physical resources that can be wheeled around as part of that. You can see, we're going to see in a minute, they've claimed back some mud. There was, so the children, it's not very green where the children live. This area was really neglected. They weren't allowed bark as part of that. It had some really weird blue plastic chippings. But you couldn't really play the blue plastic chippings, and they were hundreds of pounds to get them replenished as part of that. One of the other things that we did was we found some soil that had been bought for something else, and then we ordered loads more. So on the very first day, the children had some spades and they had some soil, and they started digging as part of that. You can definitely see the AstroTurf's not perfect from here anymore, but they've created digging areas for the children. There's large, you can see community playthings blocks there and smaller ones as part of that. You can see that they've got loose play resources. Creative area. It's there, a big play. There's room for them to chalk. There's big paints as part of that. There's boards up against the wall or painting boards where they can do those movements, particularly the younger children can do that. It doesn't have a focus for them. They did have the little bug hotel. I think that's probably there because that's probably one of the only things that survived. Really simple den building. I can't stress to you how small this area is. Opportunities for den building within that. They've created a social area in terms of books, but again, very portable and can be moved, because one of the things that they've thought about is actually this area is going to be done up at some time, but they've managed to put all of this in with portable resources. They've worked around with what they've got. The stick men are there because the pictures were taken last week on World Book Day as part of that. And it isn't perfect, but they have managed to secure an area which really, really enables high quality learning and high quality provision. The sticks were one of the few things that were there. They were climbing sticks, and they are still there. They're used in slightly different ways. And you can see they've got the hats and the books there because they do use an approach of an invitation to learning. So they're not saying you have to come and do this in this area, but there's putting some things that if you need that little bit of what can I do here, it's here and it's there for you. That's their outdoor maths area, and they're a White Rose Maths School. And you can see that's reflected in the resources that they've got there. But again, you can see the green carry-ons. The children can take and put the resources anywhere they want within this area. They can take the learning. So if they want to take the maths over to the they have a sort of a small loose part role play on one side, they can take that over there as part of that. So children are encouraged to have ownership of the areas. And one of the things that they've also done, I think, is different adults have responsibility for different areas. So there's definitely a much greater sense of ownership as part of that. That's another picture. I think you can see how small it is in terms of that and how limited it is for the number of children, because they could have 90 children in this area anytime. But they've really focused on what we want children to learn. This is their mud kitchen. So their mud kitchen is where they've grabbed back that 3 foot that was overgrown land before, and they've put the mud kitchen in. My personal bugbear, absolutely number one bugbear, is mud kitchens that don't have mud in them. So someone's put them in as a really good idea, but it just hasn't been maintained. The mud will disappear. It needs to be filled up as part of that. Compost is great, but it's also quite light. And if you can get extra soil or a different, heavier compost, then sometimes that can be better. It's also sandpits that don't have sand in them. And it's water trays that only ever have coloured water with bubbles in it, or who only have an inch of water and never have deep, clear water in them as part of that. So we're going on to look at the first of the videos. The videos come from Siren Films. You will get the links at the end, and the Stronger Practice Hub has signed up a subscription to that, so you will be able to access all of these videos as well as the videos we're going to look at today. There are lots and lots of other videos. If any of you work with babies, there are some fantastic videos around tuning into children and provision with babies, and they're absolutely great to be used as part of staff in induction, or to share a video and have a discussion around pedagogy and what does that mean for you. So we're going to go into the first of the videos, which is Olivia in the Mud Kitchen.
It's ready. Now that's Daddy doesn't talk. Please put it in the oven. Make it cook. Now it's starting to cook it. Ready. Now I wonder if it's going to have like a and then like
So I think that's a really interesting video. I think that if you look at that mud kitchen, you can probably see that it's made from pallets. It's not about what it looks like aesthetically. It's about the opportunities for learning that are there within the provision. I love the fact when she pushes down on the scale, the sound And I do wonder whether it's the sound and the vibration that she's looking for as part of that as well, that she's sustained in her independent learning. She does look across a couple of times to an adult, and I think she makes a quick check-in with them as part of that. But there's plenty of mud, there's leaves, there's different resources, there's twigs, there's a variety, you know, there's things to pat and things to mix and things to pour as part of that. And we can see some really sustained engagement from her within that area of provision. And when we look at the resources that are in there, they are all very much everyday resources, but that have been chosen really carefully for that area of provision. We talked a little bit about at the beginning about we want to have open-ended learning outside, but actually it is fine to have adult-directed or adult-led activities outside as well. The picture there is of a school. It's actually Humpty Dumpty who's fallen off a wall. And I was in when the teacher was doing that activity again. Another school which I would say has outstanding early years provision and doesn't have a reception outdoor play area other than a strip of 10-foot long. Well, I suppose it's the width of the classroom, so 20-foot long and about 6-foot wide. They also have to use the whole school playground for the majority of what they do. I think we've got a picture of them later as well when we come through. This is the nursery area, which again isn't great as part of that. And so the practitioner, it's Humpty Dumpty, it's a smashed Easter egg. I don't know whether you can see. And what was interesting was the practitioner had planned something to go one way and the children took the learning in a completely different direction and went off with the learning, but she totally went with their flow as part of that. But we're going to look at another one, which is, I suppose it's around an invitation to play. So it's where play has been linking to indoor learning, about the Three Little Pigs. This is from a school that has 46% at the moment free school meals. So I think that's quite interesting as well.
That's next one. What's your for? This is your big one. No, it's not done. I know it's not done. Yeah, it's done now. The big bad troll's coming. Why should we put up little pigs? Little pigs. He blows the straw house down first. Put the little pig in. Straw house. There. Where is the little pig in? Pig in the straw house. I'm going to blow the hole. Look, get me in for I know your husband. I'll cook, for your husband. Look, look, fire the hair with violence in it. I'll go down the ribbons. All the way to the 15 sons. All the way he was God for Esther.
I've stopped screen sharing for a little bit because I want, if possible, you to use the chat. That last video was really interesting. I do know that school, and it does have one of those amazing outdoor play areas in terms of that. What I thought was interesting in terms of that was that it was a story the child was obviously really, really familiar with. It had been set up as an invitation to play outside. So it was clearly the sand tray had been set up around that, or that particular sand tray. There was access to resources though, so the child could choose additional resources from the floor as part of that. Because the child was familiar with the story, they weren't at a point of starting from scratch. So it was taking some of their other learning forward as part of that. And we saw the language and the storytelling and the engagement of that child. So we've seen a couple of videos, we've looked at some pictures of different settings, and I've talked to you about some of my thoughts. A couple of minutes just to either chat to the people you're with, or if you could possibly to post in the chat. What are your thoughts at this moment in time about what we've seen? It might be you want to reflect on one of the two videos. It might be you want to reflect on one of the some of the photographs that we've seen. So a couple of minutes, just ideally, if you could, to post into the chat. If not, take a reflection yourself, talk to the people with you, or write a few notes if you can. Yeah, great to have the outdoors that don't have to be expensive. Yes, I would absolutely agree with that. All of the okay, the University of Cambridge is a pretty impressive outdoor player, and as I said, it goes all the way around the school to every class. But actually, all of the other schools that I'm going to show you pictures of all have significant barriers to their outdoors. Either they're not adjacent to the spaces, or they're too small, or they're too muddy, or the surfaces aren't right, or they don't have enough adults to be able to deliver. You know, they really struggle with adults and numbers as part of that. Oh, I can see someone said really good ideas about barriers such as lack of adults and behaviour issues. Yeah. If we want to get really high quality outdoor learning, then we have to be, I would say we have to be realistic about what's possible and look at solutions to solve the challenges that we might have. We're about, oh, another one, the mud kitchen. pallets of mud and lots of empty trays to fill. Yes, or even the one that was just the wooden cable, and it just had pots and pans on the top, or the one that we saw at the school that usually has, you know, amazing provision in the pandemic, where it was just tables that had bowls on, but actually the learning was just as good. And that's what they learned as part of that, that it's the importance of the adult interaction, the resources that are there. Children don't notice what it looks like. They have imagination, and we can help create that imagination there as part of that. Independent and child-led play, yes, absolutely, that's really important. And not having that end point. There's lots of different ways that learning can go. So the resources enable that. The skilled adults are there. We're going to look at the role of the adult as we go through, but the skills adults are there to take the learning forward. We're about halfway through. We're going to have a very quick break of about 5 minutes to allow you to run and get a cup of tea or coffee if you want, or just to have a bit of a wriggle. And we will be back at, it's 17 minutes past 2. We'll be back at 2:22. And I look forward to seeing you then. Welcome back. We're going to move on and explore some other aspects. You're probably familiar with the open-ended learning approach from Tina Bruce, where she talks about, and I think that was one of the comments in the chat, about open-ended learning not having a fixed answer. It's unrestrictive. It allows for future change as part of that. This is another school. I think it's the one I talked about earlier. You can see their outdoor play area behind is also their whole school playground as part of that. If you are interested, we're going to look a little bit at loose parts play, because I'm very passionate about loose parts play. But if you're interested in loose parts play and finding out more about it, it's a very big part of a lot of the Scottish curriculum. So here's some links to Play Scotland. It actually goes all the way, I think definitely all the way through primary, and maybe even beyond from that, starting with the very youngest children. And so if you're not familiar with it, we're not going to go into the detail of this particular document now, but it's a really, really good document to have a look at. And just another reminder that after this, you're going to be sent the PowerPoints, and you can use them as you wish in terms of that. So we looked at pallets earlier. I'm going to smile slightly and maybe call this the pallet school. They have a lot of very good access to a lot of pallets in this particular school. The trees behind aren't actually in the school grounds. It sort of goes onto a park. But this is a setting that started really with quite limited money and with a very underdeveloped outdoor space. It was a new build nursery that went in, and so I think it's about thinking. So we're thinking about what we want children to learn. And it's about the importance of resourcing. So we've talked a lot about the physical environment and the space, but it's really important to think about the resources. And we've already talked about how, you know, just because someone donates something to us, we don't have to have it. We don't have to have things that are broken and things that are worn out. We have to pay as much attention to the outdoor environment as we do to the indoor environment. But if we want to have that open-ended play with possibilities and enable that sustained shared thinking, those adults and children thinking together, then we need to think really carefully about the resourcing that we're going to have. And we need to think about the progression of skills as children become older. So what we might have in an outdoor provision for a 2-year-old, and we're going to look at a child who's just short of 3 in a minute, would be very different from what we might have to children who are approaching 6, for example. So this is the thinking around the things that this particular setting thought about that they wanted. So actually, some of their den building structure starts inside with chairs and areas, and the children can take those chairs and areas out, and they have lots of different sheer cloths and tarpaulins and blankets and things that children can use. I think we've got a picture of another shelter from this setting as we go through as well. And then they've thought about different fastenings, about how children can use pegs, about how they can use bulldog clips, rope, and teaching them ropes as part of that. So they've really clearly thought about, if we want to have den building as part of what we do, then what are the resources that they need to have? And if you are interested, when you get to the end, my email's at the very end, I can share with you some of the resourcing that a group of schools and settings that I work with have done. They thought about the resourcing that they would have for water, for sand, for all different range of things. It's their thinking. Yours might be different, but I'm very, very happy to share those. And they did them on the condition that they would be shared as part of that. This is my personal passion, that water flows, that water, I said earlier, that water isn't always coloured and bubbled and only an inch in a tray. These are hose lock. It used to be great when Wilko was open because it was much cheaper, but actually you can get lengths of hose pipe or even longer hose pipes, and there can be a lot of problem solving with children connecting water and taking water to different places. So I've just put that in because it is a personal thing of mine, that too much water, we want to explore the properties of water, and one of the properties of water is that it flows, and we can interrupt a flow, we can change the direction of a flow, we can split the flow and see how the force changes as part of that. So one of the things that I suppose is one of my non-negotiables is that flowing water as part of that. We're going to go and have a look at another video. We're going to have a look at a video about, it's quite short, and it's about children outdoors, and they're building a log tower.
Right, you take off that. I'm going to put yeah, good idea. Lily, it is actually heavy, isn't it? No, it isn't. Right, we're going to put that one on and together. Right,
So why do I like that video? Girls outside learning, being active. It's actually, one of them says, isn't it, it's heavy, another one says it's not, but you can clearly see it's physically demanding. They're cooperating, they're playing together, they're using actually quite basic resources that are available as part of that. One of the things that I put at the end of the presentation is another video of those children with some more. It's about 10 minutes long, so it was too long to share, but it's a link at the end where they're also involved in some risk taking as well as part of that. So one of the things that outdoor learning really supports is self-regulation. And Dr. Stuart Shanker in 2019 defined self-regulation as controlling own feelings and behaviours, applying personalised strategies to return to a state of calm, being able to curb impulsive behaviours, concentrate on a task, ignore distractions, behaving in ways that are pro-social, planning, thinking before acting, delaying gratification, and persisting in the face of difficulty. And all of those things are particularly pertinent, I think, in terms of how children learn outside, about risk taking, about losing, about understanding rules, about taking turns, about thinking before acting, about planning as part of that. And think about, when we're looking about self-regulation as well, from a sensory input point, about moving and jumping and rolling and climbing, taking turns, testing personal boundaries, risk-taking in a safe way within that, the importance of social interactions and confidence building. So all of these things are really important. And I put winning and sometimes losing, because sometimes children do need to lose. And I've also linked it to executive function and cognitive control. And we first saw that appear in the 2021 EYFS. And it talks about a set of skills that allow us to stay focused, keep organized, and get things done. It's really closely linked to self-regulation. And it's how we understand and control our emotions. And if we're thinking, and the ages 3 to 5 is when this develops most rapidly, with another spike as children move to be adolescents and early adult years. And it takes a lot of time and a lot of practice for children to be able to develop those executive function skills. But again, really poignant in terms of opportunity to do that outside, about learning and practicing skills over time, establishing routines, breaking bigger tasks into smaller chunks, games to promote imagination, role play, following rules, controlling impulses, taking risks, understanding, and they're all part of that. So that's, all part of what's important outdoors. So outdoor learning lets children to find an interest, to be engaged and involved, to make choices and decisions. We're going to have a look at a video of a 2-year-old. It says he's 2 years, 9 months. He's in a what looks like a nursery setting. There isn't a lot of information about it, and he's just learning English as an additional language.
One, two. Say hello.
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 Here's Shaja. He started at this nursery several months ago and comes for a few sessions a week.
My turn.
His home language is Persian, and he's just recently started to learn English.
Bu akşam our football do you want it?
He's relaxed and free here in the garden and is inspired by the tiny insects, picking up the English word for what he's spotted.
Fly.
Fly.
Fly. It's okay.
Children are often fascinated by the minuscule things they find outdoors.
Gucci.
Fly. Fly.
Fly.
Good boy. Fly.
Fly.
Yeah.
He spots another fly.
Fly. Fly. Hey.
And another one, he thinks.
Hey.
He looks closely
Nice.
and listens carefully to the sounds he's making. The making and listening to sounds is something Shaja is very interested in. Stephen's tuned into his interests. The pair experiment with making different sounds, taking turns. Outside, he can make as much noise as he likes. Stephen copies Shaja as well as showing him new sounds.
Well, the face. Is good?
He finds these scraps of wood and quickly works out what he could do.
Hey, making music. Good boy. 1, 2, 3, 4, 5.
He pretends and relates it to music.
Thank you. Hey.
The pieces of wood have unlimited use for Shaja to be creative.
Another turn. Oh, not on Stevens. Oh,
Outside, there are lots of other sounds to stimulate and catch his attention.
oh, what's that noise? The bus. Goodbye, bus. Bye. See you soon.
Music and language have many similarities.
Oh, loud.
Both are organisations of sound in time and space.
That's good.
Listening carefully and learning to discriminate sounds will really help Sergio with his home language and picking up a new one. Each day, Sergio carried on making and listening to sounds. Stephen's engaged with Sergio, helping extend his learning as he experiments with the different sounds he can make.
You play the drums. Well done. Drum roll. They came to watch it. Yeah.
Sounds both near and far always seem to catch his attention, helping his brain build up the ability to judge where sounds are coming from and how far away they are. He's learning fast about making rhythm. The practitioners recognise this and encourage him. The recognition he gets inspires others to join in. His interests and what he's good at are enabling him to start making bonds with other children, helping him feel more socially competent.
Okay.
As well as helping him physically, his love of football also helps him to begin to make friends.
Still there. Well, who's it again?
Running together as a group seems to be an important way, especially for boys, of forming the bonds of friendship. While his English is still limited, his body language and how it's picked up on is crucial for helping him to communicate.
You pick the ball. You pick the ball.
His physical skills, body language and careful listening are really helping him socially.
What has we do more? Two hats. Please. Please. I would like labor. The money
Hello.
In the garden, Sergio has the freedom to make his own agenda. And with Stephen's support, his physical, language and social skills are all being fully explored. He's stimulated and feeling good about himself, helping him to pick up another language quickly.
Bye. See you later.
So why I chose that video, the physical environment, the actual space was great, but that wasn't what made the learning great in that video. It was the resources that were there. And I'm sure you saw that the resources were very much everyday resources. They were quite portable. They could be moved around. It was the adults and the adult support and the adults who really tuned into the children. And it was about the relationships that were in place. And all of those things are just as important outdoors as they are indoors. And I think that what we saw was his language developing and his confidence developing over time. Planning for the unexpected. You'll have heard this. Life isn't about waiting for the storm to pass. It's about learning how to dance in the rain. I'm a big fan of planning for the unexpected. I'll talk a little bit about some of these pictures. This is a school that I'm advisor to. They have weather boxes. So this was a rainy day. This is their nursery, and ready for their rainy day, they have a collection of different bowls, and some are metal, some are plastic, some are wood. And on those really rainy days, they're out for the children, and it's about the language of the children. They're collecting the rain. They're talking about the sound and the noise it makes. They're talking about why some end up with more rain as part of that, and more liquid in them as part of it. They talk about how it evaporates afterwards as part of that. So planned. They know the possibilities of heavy rain and what they can do a part of that. The other one's about ice. I arrived at a nursery, and they'd left a tough spot tray out overnight, and it was the end of January, and it had frosted over, and there was a thin layer of ice. And there was a little boy who came in, another child who had English as an additional language, probably just 3, I would have said. And he came and he was trying to get the ice out of the tray, and the adult didn't leap in and say, no, don't do that, that's not safe. She was there and she supported him with that. She helped him with another child to get it out. It actually came out as a whole sheet. And then he spent a considerable amount of time with the adults, sometimes on his own, sometimes with another child, smashing that ice to break it down. And there were a few tiny leaves built in it as well, so he was looking at the leaves as he did it, and part of that. Fantastic language from the practitioner, supporting both his learning and acquisition of English, but also the other children who were working with him did have English as a first language, but talking about the language linked to the ice and the frost and the snowing and the melting as part of that, frozen as part of that. And I have a lot of bugbears, you'll find that out. But one of them is when I look at planning, and it might be settings that have a topic-led planning, and they put winter in December, and they tie it in with Christmas and snow. But we know that in reality, for most of the country, the time you're going to, the biggest chance you have of getting snow and of getting ice is at the end of January and into February, because that's when it happens. And lots of settings, they will plan to have a focus on that, but they will plan to do it when it happens. So it's flexible within the planning. And if it hasn't happened by a certain point, they might pick it up and cover it. But planning for when it's going to happen as part of that. And part of that planning for the unexpected is actually the night before you go out, you generally know when it's going to be frosty or frozen from the weather forecast. You go out and you make sure those tough spot trays have water in them, and they have resources frozen into tiny things maybe frozen into them, natural things maybe as part of that. I was with a school, and we were modelling this. We knew it was about to say, took one of the teddies from inside, dipped it in water so it was quite wet, hung it up in the tree. So the children came out the next morning to see the frozen bear, and they could talk about that. Hanging ropes or strings from the trees, again, dipping them into water so it creates icicles. You might get natural icicles created around that. It allows you to talk about what you can see, but talk about the melting and freezing process as part of that. I work with some settings who have little dips which they know will fill with ice, but they might just pour a little bit of water in there on that day before they go home. So planning for the unexpected and thinking about how you can build those things into the environment. If you don't have dandelions, then you won't be able to blow the heads from them in terms of that. But also I want to tell you very quickly about the story of a daffodil. And the story of a daffodil starts in year 1. I was in a year 1 science lesson in a school, and they were doing what is very much part of lots and lots of year 1 classes. They were going to dissect some daffodils bought from Morrison's and look at the different parts of it. So it started off with, did the children know what these daffodils were? And then they talked about a daffodil, and then the children said, we planted daffodils. And at that point, the teacher said, yes, let's go back. So she had pictures of those year 1 children planting a daffodil at the beginning of reception. So in the very first week of reception, those children planted a daffodil. And a little spike was put in with a photograph of the bulb. And then it took a long time, and the practitioners revisit and talk about what might be happening under the ground. But then eventually they started to see a shoot. Photograph was taken about that. Leaves came, photograph taken, bud came, bulb came. And then the daffodil had died off as well. And at each point, they'd taken a picture of the cycle and they'd laminated them. And it was almost like a little flip book by the end of the year, so that the practitioners could talk to the children about the life cycle of a daffodil. They didn't only have daffodils, they have strawberries. Strawberries are great. They're really resilient. If you put a strawberry in tiny spots, they'll come back year after year. So in this year one lesson, they could revisit what they'd done in reception, but better than that, they walked across to the reception outdoor play area and they picked the daffodil that they had planted the year before as part of that. There were lots of other daffodils in the outdoor play area, and they brought it back and they looked at their daffodil. And then they did the dissection using the ones bought from the supermarket. And I thought that was amazing. Got better. Went to year 2, where they were also looking at daffodils, but they were looking at bulbs. So showed them a picture of a daffodil. What was this? This was the daffodil we dissected last year. Went all through the remembering, the learning, the vocabulary that had started all the way through from that first day in reception, when they planted that bulb, or that first week in reception, they planted that bulb in year 2. They traipsed out to the outdoor play area in reception. They went to their daffodil and they dug it up. So they dug up the daffodil they remembered planting as a bulb with the photograph they had. It was flowering. And so they brought it back to the classroom and they looked at that bulb and they dissected it jointly together. They understood that meant it wasn't going to be replanted, and that was the end of it. And when we talk about revisiting during a curriculum, getting children to go back and revisit those experiences and talk about it, there was 3 years almost of learning linked to that daffodil. So it wasn't just that planting it in isolation, but it was the opportunity for children to go back, photographs to help them recap, books to help them recap, but actually the importance of the practitioner looking at that photograph outside of children. Do you remember the daffodil we planted? We can't sit bulb we planted. There's nothing there. What do you think's going to happen? And building on that first sign with the photographs to remind them. Nature, whatever the space. This is the school that I said uses the playground. If you want to have sunflowers flowering while you're at school, they need to be planted really early. I always see planting and growing for the start of the summer term. If you plant then, you'll never see it through to fruition. So this is what the daffodils look. This is what the sunflowers looked like at the end of the summer term. The caretaker then, they were very fortunate to have one on site, and watered them over the summer. And the first thing these children did when they came back into year 1 was actually to go and look at the daffodil head that had died off. They cut it down, they dissected it, looked at the seeds, and gave some of the seeds to the reception children to grow again for next year as part of that. So it needs planning. These are all really simple examples. This is the pallet school again, but you can see they've made a bug hotel from pallets. Actually, if you just get a carpet square or a bit of old carpet and you put it down, particularly if it's rubber backed, and you put it down on the ground anywhere, it will work if you put it on tarmac. It will work even better if you put it on a bit of mud. Within a very short time, you will have slugs and you will have worms and you will have woodlice on that. So, you know, you have to attract nature in as part of that. They do planting in tyres. That one's mint. Again, mint dies back. And so they see the cycle of it, but also the sensory feeling of picking it and smelling it and experiencing it. They have beans that they plant, they have raspberries, they have strawberries. It's all within a really small space within that, and it's all created just within tyres that grow. I've gone on. I said that I would talk about bikes, and I want to come back to the importance of having adults who understand child development. Quite often, the bikes are a big area of controversy. I was in it is a reception class in a school, and they have a purpose-built bike track that was put in, sort of painted on the ground. Their outdoor play has a very long, thin part within it, and boys madly keen, boys, particularly girls, sometimes madly keen to race on the bikes around the track. They have 3 bikes, talking to the head teacher, he said, oh, it's a real area of conflict. And some of the boys were on the bikes. Some of them were waiting to have a go. Some of them were arguing about whose turn it was. Really simple thing that we did. And I'm sure you probably do this. We put in place a rota system. So there was a laminated sheet on a clipboard. Everybody loves a clipboard, boys and writing. Their name cards were there to help them. It was the beginning of reception. They had to put themselves onto the list they were numbered 1, 2, 3. The bikes were numbered 1, 2, 3, so they could choose which one if they wanted. They had to put themselves on the list. There was a timer. Each child was timed. I can't remember whether it was 3 minutes or 5 minutes, but there was a timed go. They were taught about rules and taking turns. They could go off anywhere else in the provision, so they didn't have to stand and wait. And they were called back when it was their turn. So they were getting to practice their writing skills. They were understanding about negotiation. They were understanding about taking turns. They were understanding about timing. And that was working well. I visited it more recently, and they've actually taken it on to another level. So now the boys themselves had created a tally system. So they were now making a tally of how many times each boy had been on each bike each week. They do have girls that go on, and they do encourage them as part of that. But what had become an area that was a challenge had now become an area that really enabled a lot of that self-regulation. And this is a setting. It has 2-year-olds, 3-year-olds, 4-year-olds, 5-year-olds. It might have up to 190 children in what is a really, really tiny outdoor play space. And they have a progression in skills. So by the time the children leave their 2-year-old provision and go into nursery, they want them to be riding a 3-wheeled trike. By the time they go into nursery, they want them to be able to ride a 2-wheeled balance bike with confidence. And by the time they finish reception, they want them to be able to ride a 2-wheeled pedal bike. They have a really limited space. So what they have is this is their storage. They're not the pallet school, though. They do look like it here. So they have some bikes that are available all the time during the continuous provision, or most of the time. They do have some days where it's no bike because of the space. But what they also do is they have focus time where they take the children out onto the much larger playground to allow them to practice going down on their 2-wheeled balance bike from one end to another, going down on their 2-wheeled pedal bike from one thing to another. And if a child starts in reception and they can't use a 2-wheeled balance bike, that's part of their catch-up, because they know their aim by the end of reception is they're going to be using that pedal bike. Have another school where it has a head trauma unit very close to the school, and there are a lot of head accidents caused. It's a biking city, and there are a lot of head accidents caused by children and adults not wearing biking helmets, and it's a bit of a culture probably. And a lot of those accidents would either be less severe or would have been prevented had the children been wearing a helmet. So with their very youngest 3-year-olds, from the minute they get on their scooter, they have to put a helmet on. They don't need a helmet from safety point of view in a scooter with 3-year-olds, but it's about embedding that culture. So they go from a scooter with a helmet, they go to trikes, to balance bike, to pedal bikes, then all the way through bikeability as they go through. So they're really clear about how their progression of that curriculum of bike skills goes from the very youngest 3-year-old up to their year 6s and when they leave as part of that. But it's really important to have adults who understand that child development. And for me, it's really important to have vehicles that take 2 or more children, because they support that collaboration as part of that. But giving that time where actually we're going to go away from that space, we're going to go in a smaller group, and we're going to teach those skills of how to ride a bike. Talked in one of the previous courses that I delivered about sustained shared thinking, so I don't want to dwell in it too much. But what we want to have is a point where adult and child are jointly involved, or child and child are jointly involved in problem solving. So they're working together, they're talking through dialogue, back and forth conversations, aiming for at least 4, more in sustained shared thinking, but when they're working to solve a problem as part of that. And we're going to go and have a look at some examples of that in a video. We are back to the pallet school. These are some more about their dens and about their shelters. And there's a little bit here. I'm going to tell you a little bit about problem solving. So that's a musical wall at the bottom that you can see. But they also have another pallet, which doesn't have anything on it usually, but it stands similar to this. There was a little girl, I think she was Lithuanian, just arrived, very young, just 3, I would say. Limited English, and there were 2 boys who were also pretty much at the early stages of learning English. She'd only been in for about a week, and she'd spent the first week largely watching what other children would do, which you can absolutely understand, because she'd newly arrived from overseas in the past few weeks as part of that. We were outside watching the outdoor play, and the boys had been using pipes the week before and rolling objects down the pipe. And she had a walnut in her hand, and she wanted to get the walnut to roll down the pipe. And she was basically trying to wedge the pipe into the gap gaps between to get it so that it would roll down. And she couldn't get it to go. And she, because, you know, and we didn't know how to solve the problem. It was going to be something about the angle of the pipe and the pressure with which, force with which it was dropped and the size of the object. And she was directing these two boys to try and help her when none of them spoke the same language and none of them was speaking English. And it was that they were working together to solve a problem. And just the subtle hint by an adult or the suggestion by an adult, what do you think would happen if we moved the pipe up? But because the children weren't first English speakers, the adult looked to them, got to the consent and just tried with another pipe a tiny bit higher. And eventually she managed to get to do it. And not only was one walnut rolling down, but they were all rolling down, by which point she was leading the play and there were other children all around her. And I spoke to the practitioner afterwards and she said that activity continued for quite a long time with different objects. And that was really, you know, a really key moment for that child in terms of that setting. But it was really subtle support by an adult and her having seen children doing that before and wanting to be part of it. So the really importance of asking open-ended question, how, what and why. And a child asked me last week, why is there glass in that tree? And it wasn't glass in the tree. You can imagine it was ice that was frozen. And that was a really interesting thing to investigate. And that was in a setting where they very much use glass. I left that setting on Monday lunchtime, actually, and very much into risk taking. They have a tree. The tree is trimmed to make it safe. But as I left and walked through, 2 3-year-olds climbing up the tree, you know, and waving at me as I left as part of that. But, you know, the children are encouraged to ask questions because the adults ask questions of them all the time. We're going to have a look at that in practice in a setting. We're going to have a look at some sustained shared thinking.
That one is very wobbly, isn't it? I'm going to try. Hold it still. Right. Will it help? There we go. You did it. You went into the water. That was good. That was a good step. I'm going to try that one too. So you step 1 foot, and then you stepped another foot, and then you've got to cross. Oh, that was very good. That was a very long jump. Well, I step back. Maybe we should move this. Shall we move this out of the way? You want that one?
Kill somebody.
Want it for rescuing somebody? Okay, so if we fall in, are you going to rescue us?
Yeah.
Right. Okay, we might not fall in though, because we're getting used to the balance thing. So let's see. Oh, it is a bit wobbly, but I'm getting better because now I know to use my airplane arms. Are you rescuing me? Ready? Pull! Yes, you helped me use your body to pull me.
You did it for me. Can I do it too? No. You can do it.
What? Are you going to go on the back? We need somebody rescued here, so let's rescue them. That's it. Pull! Oh, good job. I think we've got the rescuers here. Shall I have a set now?
Yes.
Right. Okay. Right. Okay. Would you like to rescue me from this point? Right. Can you reach me? Can you flick it to reach my hands? I'm going to put my head to the side because I don't want it to hit me. Oh, I've got it. Right. Okay. Are you ready? You rescued me. Thank you. You are strong. Do it to you. Do you want to go on there? Would you like to do it? Right, okay. Now we don't want to hit anybody, so we have to be careful when we're putting it across. Okay, do you think you could feed it across maybe? How could we get it across? That's it, like that. Stand a little bit closer. I'll hold on to you and you hold on to that. Ready? Where's she? Oh, got this, got this. Ellie. Oh. Right, ready, big pull. You don't want to get rescues. We're getting very good at rescuing. You've got some careful because it moves around all over the place. So we need to know where that end is, don't we? So we don't get hit by it. What's this? What's this? Rescues. Would you like a turn? Shall I rescue you?
Yeah.
Okay, go on then. Should we try rescuing both of you? Because look what I've started. How many ends are on this pipe? 2 ends, and how many children are on the plank? 2 children and 2 ends. So that means you could hold on. You ready? 1, 2, 3. Oh, yes, have I rescued you both? Yes. Right, we're going to try that way now. Shall we go around? Okay, we've got, how many children have we got to rescue this time? We've got 2 children to rescue, okay. So are you doing one at a time or are you doing both together?
One at a time.
One at a time, okay. Are you ready?
Right.
Okay, be careful. Remember, feed it across carefully. That's it. You got it?
Yeah.
Ready? Oh! I think we need to hold it tight. The rescuer needs rescuing. Shall we pull you up? Are you ready? Pull! Okay, we've got another one to rescue. Feed it across gently. Because this bit, if you flick it, it might really hurt our face, mightn't it? So what's the best way of getting it across?
Pull it.
It's got a mind of its own, that pipe, hasn't it?
No.
Well, we're gonna, shall we rescue this little boy first?
No, right. Yeah.
Oh, there we go. Right, it's definitely your turn this time. Okay? So let's get the pipe across. Why don't you do it together? Right, ready? Pull! Yes! We're all rescued.
So that video was really interesting, I think, in terms of the environment was interesting. It clearly is a setting that has an outdoor in all weathers, but it has the environment supports that. It has the adults to enable that, and it has the clothing which enables that. And that isn't possible in all settings. I think that she asked mostly open-ended questions. She asked a couple of closed questions. She led, she modeled language, but she actually took the children's ideas, they solved the problems together, and at the end it finished with the child becoming the adult. And when we look at the resources that we used in terms of that, it was a puddle, 2 bits of wood, and a short piece of tube. But obviously the skill that brought all of that together in terms of that was the adult. The interaction of the adult, and I would imagine the pedagogy of the setting, so the children were used to doing that and used to doing that over time. So we're coming towards the end of our time, and I just want to sum up in terms of what we've talked about this afternoon, and for me, what's important about having that clear pedagogy for how we want children to learn, indoors and outdoors, but outdoors. And so as a result, what does that mean for us in terms of adults? And it needs to be shared and understood by all staff. There needs to be ownership of that pedagogy, and it also needs to be shared and supported by leaders. I've talked you through some examples earlier of where it wasn't supported by leaders, and where it was and the difference that made. About having a planned and purposeful progressive curriculum. We saw in that video, it won't look the same or feel the same or be the same in terms of resourcing for children who are 2 as those who are just 5. So we need to have that progression in resourcing. If we've got a shared area, we need to have resources that children of all different ages can access and use. It might be that it gets smaller. We saw in the sand picture of that school, they had really big trucks with their 3-year-olds because really hands-on as part of that. And children need to have an opportunity to come back and revisit the curriculum. It needs to be underpinned by adults who understand child development. And I reflected on that when I looked at the video of the little boy with English as an additional language, because we have children who join all the time who are learning English for the first time. And a lot of the skills that the adult used would be just as pertinent with an older child as part of that. And we might, we're highly unlikely to have 2-year-olds who need to be learning to write their name, but we might well have 4-year-olds who need to be supported to learn to hop, skip, to jump, to climb up and down stairs and to develop their physical skills. So it's about having a curriculum that can be accessed by the child at the point that they're on. So that's why it's so important that it's underpinned by adults who understand child development. About really thinking about the environment, being realistic about the space that you've got. And I think that what we've seen in a lot of the pictures that we've seen, and to a certain extent in the videos, is that the resourcing is really important. And it's not just how it looks, it's what are the possibilities of those resources. And we can have, I work with lots and lots of settings that have to pack up everything at the time, and they still have really high quality outdoor play because they focus on what do we want the children to learn, what resourcing do we need, and how can we make the best possible use. About thinking about the staffing. If you have one adult outside with a large number of children, it is going to be really hard to get that high quality adult interaction. So maybe thinking about how you can facilitate that in a different way, about thinking about how you can plan to have quality amounts of time. And, it can be better sometimes for children to have access to a shorter period of time outside, but where it is a better quality time, and the resourcing and the adult and the interaction and the engagement is better as part of that. We want open-ended learning and we want children to be able to revisit, but it's absolutely fine to have either invitations to learn, like we saw in terms of the 3 Little Pigs, which is definitely taking the indoor learning outside, or to have focused activities which are led by adults outside as well. And if we get that in place, then what we've got is opportunities to enable children to revisit, practice, consolidate and extend their learning, about being open-ended, about really focusing on what do we want the children to learn, going back to Reese, who never ever went into a classroom, but he still managed to learn everything that he needed to learn, and about really providing those opportunities for risk-taking, collaboration and experimentation, because they are what underpin that self-regulation and are starting to support children to be able to control and regulate their own emotions. So in summary, what I always say to people is to think about, and you might want to share it in the chat, I'll get the chat up in a minute, what's your next step? What's the one next thing, 2 maybe, that you're going to do differently as a result of the things that we've looked at today? I always write them in a post-it note and I put them in my diary for 2 or 3 weeks. I use a paper diary from now, so that if I do forget them, and sometimes I do, it's a prompt for me. And if I've done them, it reminds me to think about, okay, so did it work? And what's the impact? And I think one of the takeaways that I hope you get is that you need to keep refining what you do all the time. So focus on, is it working for our children? And what can we do that makes it work? But thank you for your time today. You will be sent out the slides following this. My email, as I said, is there. If you want it, if you want to be sent the thinking that particular group of schools and settings did together around planning for resourcing in areas, I'm very happy to share that with you as well. But thank you very much for your time today.
Thank you very much, Rachel. That was really, really helpful. And I hope that there's been lots to sort of take away from there and take back to your settings.